My Gavan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I am Arakir Galadirthan, the head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome back to another updated faction overview for version 1.2. And also, may I just say, Merry Christmas. For if everything has gone well, you're watching this on that day indeed, or that's when it was at least released. So, Dole Amroth. I haven't read any of the comments since the last video because I recorded these back to back. So, no spiel further to talk about, save for the forts that I spoke of in the Gondor one are now present, and there, for example, is a Gondorian fort. But, Dole Amroth, at the start of the game, what can you expect? Well, the size of your domain, as you can clearly see, is tiny. Considering that Gondor have the largest starting domain of any nation, and then you compare that with Dole Amroth, who only get 3 provinces. Linhir, Methrast, and Dole Amroth itself. So that, by extension, therefore means that your ability to recruit early on is very, very limited. You get very little options, very few options in the early game for army composition, for army gathering. But despite the fact that you've got a small region, it doesn't hinder you all that much, as we will see. But where can you expand into then? What are your rebel regions? Well, of course, Etheland to your north is a rebel region. You're welcome to move in and take that. And can eventually become quite a good money earner because it's a big city. To the south as well, you can cross the Aether Anduin, the mouths of the Anduin, and take Tirithorros, the castle just to the south of the Anduin River there, where you'll also see a Men of the South fort. So you can cross the river and take Tirithorros, or indeed Barad-Han, or try and push in for Amun Aithel. But other than that, you've got no other options. You are surrounded on your north, west, east by Gondor. I was going to say and south then, but not. So, rebel-wise, your only real options are to cross the Anduin after you've taken Etheland. So what about economy? Well, this is what I was saying. It doesn't actually hinder you all that much, because within the city of Dole Amroth itself lies a military dockyard. This is the largest sized port available to Dole Amroth. And so Dole Amroth itself is a very good moneymaker. The city itself is a cracking moneymaker. And as you can see, Linhir and Methrast are both quite wealthy at the start of the game as well. So despite your small size, there's quite a large ability, or there's a good ability to earn money. So it doesn't hinder you too much. Also, the presence of the forts allows you to get free upkeep on units whilst considering getting them ready to charge out for you. So if you need a staging ground, you can get 8 free units of upkeep in these forts, ready to then move out as one large army, and potentially then take a money hit. But the presence of Dole Amroth gives you a lot of money in the early game, which is very, very good. But who are your neighbours after your rebel expansion? Where are you going to go with this money from Dole Amroth and Linhir and Methrast? Well, of course, naturally and most normally, you're going to head south. Your die-hard enemy, and the enemy that Dole Amroth are meant to kind of parody, are Umbar. So Gondor and Harad are meant to go toe-to-toe, and Dole Amroth and Umbar go toe-to-toe as well, both having small starting domains, both being very naval. However, it's more than likely that you will actually be mainly against Harad. Harad will push north. They normally take Barad-Han. I believe they get it in the turn 1, actually. I can't quite recall. But they will be up at this point very, very quickly. So you've got to do what you can to try and muster and get south across the river and take the staging grounds early. Because if you're having to field armies from your capital, which you will do for some time, you will be in a little bit of a worse off position. Of course, you've got your other neighbours, and your biggest neighbour is Gondor, just to your north, who you are allied with. But other than that, Umbar and Harad are the ones you're going to get in the early game. You will come into contact with the Variags of Khand as they push out through Imlad Khanan, but they won't be a main enemy until a little bit later on, until they feel that they've really got the edge on you. So those are your neighbours. In terms of diplomacy, you start allied with Gondor and Rohan, and you are at war with all of those around you, including, interestingly, the Easterlings. So whilst Gondor aren't at war with the Easterlings anymore, you are. So do factor that one in, bear that in mind, should you ever rock up around the far eastern side of Mordor and reach them. So, construction-wise, what can Dole Amroth do? Well, like Gondor, you are not restricted in any way. You get all 3 levels of castle, you get all 5 levels of towns. As I said in the last video, and I'll say in this one, that's Motte and Bailey, Wooden Castle, and Castle in the castle line, and Village, Town, Large Town, City, and Large City in the township line. Buildings of note for Dol Amroth are, as I've already mentioned, the military dockyard you've already got built, which is very, very useful. And you also get a fiefdom barracks, because Dol Amroth and Gondor share all the fiefdom units. So in Dol Amroth itself, you can also train all the fiefdom units. And it works the same way that it did with Gondor, with the further away units taking longer to replenish. A building that is entirely new, and we will cover in this with these earlier videos, is the Fort Town building. Now, this building was introduced in 1.1 by myself, and any region that has a fort in it also can build a Fort Town post, and from it you get 3 units of essentially rebels. They're the base game's bandits, really, but they're quite good for their tier. They're reasonably defensive, but they take a very long time to train. But the building itself also gives you a little bit of a increase in tradable goods, so there's a little bit of extra money coming from it, and you also get these one-off defensive units, which is quite useful. Also with Dol Amroth, along with Gondor, they're one of the few factions who can build the Great Roads, or the highways. They're called Great Roads for Dol Amroth, they're called Trade Routes for Umbar, but the only nations that can are the Dwarves, Númenórean's descendants, and Umbar, who are Númenórean descendants, I suppose. But the Elves can't, neither can the rest of the Evil Men, and the Orcs certainly can't. So they give you a massive advantage in the late game if you can get there. Because Dol Amroth, I'm told, on all accounts, is much harder than it was in 0.5. Almost purely due to the boost we've given Harad. Their faction has been totally changed, completely altered from the ground up, and they present a far greater challenge now that they've got the support of the Variags of Khand as well. Many of our testers have suggested that Dol Amroth is now a very, very tricky campaign. So that's your construction. No real restrictions. You can get out there. They trained their diplomat as well, I should say, at the construction point. Your diplomat comes out of the Tirith Ayar, the Seaward Tower, or the Sea Tower, Tower of the Sea. It changed your Haven Guard. It also trains all 3 Tirith Ayar units, and it trains your diplomat. If you want another diplomat, you're either going to hot tail it down to Finabel and take that, or Umbar and take that. And that's where you get your diplomats. Now, in terms of scripts, once again, there are no scripts that you directly control. But the Umbar invasion script affects Dol Amroth, so all 3 of your starting regions and Athelon, should you expand into that, are all susceptible to the raids by the Umbarim. They can all be attacked by the Umbar raids. They will not stop until you take the city of Umbar itself, and even if you then lose it, the raids will not carry on. So once you've taken the city once, the Corsairs will think twice about raiding your heartland, in as so much as they will never do it again. But the script itself just spawns a small army of men of Umbar who will besiege your city and try and take it. It gets very easily countered if you've got the troops, but therein lies the problem. Normally you don't have the troops because it's your heartland, why would you? So it can be a tricky script to counter. So before we deal with what's changed between 0.5 and 1.2 visually with the terrain map, let's deal with tips and difficulty. Well, as I've already touched upon, Dol Amroth is apparently now a much harder campaign. This is in twofold: the boost we've given Harad and the massive weakness we have given to the bodyguards of Dol Amroth. Specifically, and more importantly, to both Prince Adrahil and Prince Imrahil. As you can see, Lord Imrahil now only has Royal Swan Guard. He no longer has Knights of the Silver Swan. And even if you're thinking Prince Adrahil is going to be way better, we've got our problem solved there. Prince Adrahil only has Talon Knights, the dismounted version of Knights of the Silver Swan. So, whilst they are still a very heavy cavalry nation, and they've got the best elite cavalry arguably in the game in terms of their options available to them, your early game rush that used to be able to do as Dol Amroth, you can no longer do. So all in all, it just makes it a much harder campaign. But in terms of tips, I would still suggest that the best way forward, as it was before and it is now, is to still try and rush Harad. Try and build an army as fast as possible, ignore if you're losing money, and try and go straight for Finabel, their capital city just here. Harad's capital is one of their best money makers, along with Gobel Mirlond, and if you can take Finabel, that secures this kind of northern section, because they're going to be busy trying to retake that. You want to be careful before you get involved with Ramlond, because that will bring the Corsairs of Umbar by land towards you, which can be very difficult to counter. But Harad you should be able to more than deal with in the early game. But as I say, their units are now a lot better, so it requires a bit more tactical thinking. But that's still what the suggestion I would give you. Gather an army and try and rush for the capital city. So, differences to the map since 0.5. Well, first of all, the number of forts that you can see. There's a fort now on both sides of the mountains of Dor and Ernil. The fort just up there, the Gondorian fort there. There's a Gondorian fort north of the river. There's an Easterling fort, we'll call it, or Southron fort south of the river. And there's a few border changes as well, as you can see with Harad itself, but that more covered in the Harad video. Additionally, there's another new fort just there. But also a big change is Atheland now has a port. Because a port and a city cannot occupy the same square, it was impossible for Atheland, when it was just this tiny island, to build a port. But as we know, Atheland itself means Elf Haven or Elf Port, and it's famed for being a port. So I took the decision that having this minor additional boost to the land here was worth it, so that Atheland could actually have a port. So there is a port in Atheland. But that's about it, really. There are not too much change from 0.5 for Dol Amroth in terms of the area around them. And one of these rivers, actually, there used to be a crossing up there, which I believe there still currently is, but I do actually plan on removing that, so that there's only the two bridges to get in, makes Dol Amroth a bit easier to defend. But that's about it. So when you come to play 1.2, that little crossing there, if it is indeed a crossing or not just a trick of the terrain, will be gone. But other than that, nothing really new to the Dol Amroth area. So that concludes the campaign map. Now, before I get onto the battle map side, because I want to explain about it now, part of the reason why I've kept the battle map side in, even though it doesn't really tell you anything new, is I'm going to use it purely as a way to show you what the roster looks like. So that's why I'm going to blitz through. It's going to be a lot shorter than the Gondor one. Unless there are any units, then I'll spend time on brand new units, and I'll talk about units that have gone. But otherwise, I am just going to use it as a way of showing you the units and at what stages you get them. I'm no longer going to use it as a full-on breakdown of the units, so going through their stats bit by bit by bit. I will do that with the factions who have been massively overhauled, which is Anduin and Harad, and possibly someone else, if I can think about it, but I don't think there is. Anduin and Harad have been massively changed, and I will do complete overviews of their rosters. The other factions, I will just cover the new units and the new looks, but it's primarily going to be used just to show you when the units become available and what your units actually look like, so that you get an idea of when you're going to get something and which units you might want to aim for. So bear with me just one moment. Welcome to the army of Dol Amroth. So, as I say, this is just to show you when units are available, but as with the Gondor video, the AOR units are over here, and your standard train everywhere are over here, broken down into militia, before the barracks event, but second tier, and then after the barracks event, and then elites, and then Ubers, and also, and then your general's bodyguard standing on their own. So as you can see, your mainline units as Dol Amroth are few and far between. You get quite a bit before the barracks event, but then nothing really after. This makes expansion quite tricky for Dol Amroth. But there is a reason for that, because in the late, their AOR cavalry units are outrageously good, and there they are all lined up there. And they get quite good infantry as well in the very late game, but all of these are restricted by where they can be trained. So they're an interesting little faction. I've spent so much time on Dol Amroth. They were a faction who I overhauled time and time again. As everyone knows, they are my favourite faction. Part of the reason why they've come out today, and I just really like them. But there isn't really anything new. Now, some of their units do look new, but Dol Amroth have not got a single new unit from the last overview video to this overview video. Every unit they have here you've seen before. They just look slightly different, some of them. And, of course, the unit cards are new for almost every faction, thanks to Miss Teed. But if we look through their units then, at the beginning, the same as Gondor, you get the same units. There's Gondor Militia. They have a different look because when they upgrade, they will look like their unit card. So you've got your Gondor Militia. There's their stats if you want to have a read. You've also got, of course, your Archer Militia. Again, there's their stats if you want to have a read. And you get your Cavalry Militia. Already looking good in their Amrothian look. But there's their stats there. I believe the Archer Militia as well, actually. No, they have the lower tier look. But, oh, these aren't, these are badly placed, actually. Sorry, let me put them there. They are before the barracks event, but then they're better than militia. Much better than militia. But the other unlike Gondor, you don't have an aggressive and a defensive militia. You have a standard militia and a javelin throwing militia. So you get the coastal wardens. Now these are technically AOR, but they're so prevalent that I've not put them in the AOR side, because they're available on any coastal region, which covers obviously all of the coast, and even the regions that border, I believe, the Anduin are considered coastal regions. So they're very, very readily available. So I put them on this side rather than the AOR. But they're coastal wardens, so they're similar stats to the militia, slightly worse really, but they get a javelin, so they can be good in that regard. But they are arguably your worst unit, but they do get a javelin. So there's your coastal wardens. Nothing standing out at the beginning. But unlike Gondor, who only get the peacekeepers in the second tier, you get quite a few units in the second tier. And let's start off with what Dol Amroth is famous for, because if we give Dol Amroth an Age of Empires style categorization, they are a heavy cavalry faction. You get a guild, you get the Master Horsebreeders Guild that only a few factions do. I believe Khand, Rohan and Dol Amroth are the only three that do.
Prepare for battle.
But, so before you go to the barracks event, you can train your Dol Amroth Squires, and these are available everywhere. And there's their stats. Nothing amazing, but they're about on par already with the Gondor Cavalry. And Gondor Cavalry are about as good as Gondor ever get. And this is only your second of 6 options, whereas Gondor only get 2 options. So already you're a vastly more cavalry-orientated nation. But these come, as I say, just after militia, but before the barracks event. Now on foot before the barracks event come the guardsmen and the pikemen.
Bloody your spear points.
And these are very, very dependable units, and they're going to be pivotal to you if you intend to take on Harad in the early game, which you should be trying to do. So there's the stats for the pikemen. Very, very, very useful unit. Again, nothing hidden about them interesting of note. And there's the guardsmen. And there's their stats as well. They can make a shield wall, which can become in very handy. And all of these units get an upgraded look when you upgrade their armor, which is always very, very nice. But the Dol Amroth are kind of the military wing of Gondor, which is why they have a lot more options. They've got a lot more troops, and they've got a lot better troops, arguably. Gondor rely on their fiefdoms to supply their troops. Dol Amroth rely on Dol Amroth to supply their troops. I know these are all AOR, and so are the fiefdom, but almost all of these just come from your homeland, your core 3 regions, and Theland actually, your core 4 regions, as we'll cover in a moment. But the fiefdoms cover obviously all of Gondor, so Gondor rely a bit more on widespread availability. Dol Amroth require their whole army comes from one key location, but their army is damn good. But once you go past the barracks event, you get your first sort of elite-ish unit, which is the Dol Amroth Men-at-Arms. Now again, not an amazing unit, but highly dependable and very useful to you in the later stages of the game. And there's their stats. And accompanying them are the Amrothian archers.
Every shot count.
Once again, nothing really to scream out about them. They're really solid archers. Gondor and Dol Amroth, as I said in the last one, are very much the default faction. So every unit that they've got is normally decidedly average. And then they've got the odd unit that stands out, like Fountain Guard, like Knights of the Silver Swan. But most of their mainstream units are bang on the middle of average. So Orcs will always be worse than Dol Amroth and Gondor, and Dwarves and Elves will always be better, essentially. And then there are grounds in between. We'll come to the Bodyguard last. So those are the only units you get in the absolutely everywhere category. So very, very heavily restricted. You've not got very much at all, but you do get at least most of it before the barracks event, which gives you a good boost against Harad, which we will see when we cover Harad's video. But if you want to get some AORs involved, many of these are actually available before the barracks event, but in a very, very limited capacity. But one of the units that's available more readily are your Ranger unit. And these are the Nimrodel Rangers, wielding the fierce steel bows of Numenor. And as they are a ranger unit, they have the same sorts of stats as every single ranger. Almost all human rangers have identical stats because they all perform the same role. So again, very good range, very high accuracy, good amount of missiles, and there's their stats just there. But, as I was saying, and I can cover it in one little speech, all of these units come from your 4 homeland provinces. Theland, Dol Amroth, Methrast, and Linhir. And that's it. So all of these units are dependent upon your core homeland in one way or another. The only exception to that rule is the Haven Guard, who, like the Coastal Wardens, they come from coastal regions. But because they come so late in the game, I didn't put them in the same category as Coastal Wardens, because their lateness coupled with the coast does make them rare, whereas the earliness and coupled with the Coast of the Wardens makes them not too rare. But the Haven Guard do actually come from any coastal region, so you can recruit them outside of Dol Amroth. And there are one or two other little caveats as we go through, but we'll cover the infantry and then we'll cover the cavalry. So, after the barracks event, there is one unit of just prior to being elite. So, in the tier structure, you've got militia, you've got mainline pre-barracks event, mainline post-barracks event, elite, and then uber. And in your mainline post-barracks event, the only real unit is the Dor en Ernil footmen, who come from, as I say, the core Heartland provinces. They're just dependable spearmen again. Nothing really to scream about. They're kind of the counterpart to the Dol Amroth men-at-arms, except they're kind of the defensive one and men-at-arms are the aggressive one. But there's the added caveat that they are AOR. But, so that's all you get in the... I say but so much, don't I? That's all you get in the post-barracks event mainline. So let's move to your elites. Starting off with your elites are the 3 Tirith IR, although the 2 Tirith IR really, the other ones are a bit uber. So from the Tirith IR itself, these are the units that have an extra caveat. Not only are they only available in your Heartland, but they're actually only available in the city of Dol Amroth, because they come from the Tirith IR. They're Dol Amroth's answer to the Tower Guard or the Fountain Guard.
Our arrows grant swift justice.
And there are 3 of them. There's the archers. So these are very, very good archers. They're elite archers, and they are very good once they've finished with their arrows. There's their stats just there. But as I say, they only come from Dol Amroth. Coupled with them are the Tirith IR Wardens, who are the spear and shield version. And they likewise only come from Dol Amroth, and there's their stats. But I also spoke of the Haven Guard. The Haven Guard are one of your only real shock troops. You don't actually, as you can see, get very many shock troops at all, because you rely so heavily on cavalry, but you do get the Haven Guard. They're your only real shock infantry. And they are very, very good. They're very high attack, as you'd expect of shock infantry. But because of their late game presence, they actually get quite good defense as well. And there's their stats. And as it says, they require a coastal region. And rounding off your infantry in this uber tier are the Talon Knights, the unit that Prince Adrahil goes to battle with. One of the best infantry units the game actually has, outside of dwarves and elves, and there's their stats just there. They frighten enemies and they inspire your troops, so they're very, very useful to have. And as with many, many uber units, they cannot run away. So really, they're kind of in a tier above. They are really ubers, whereas these are just in the elite tier, because there's a few things that make the Talon Knights stand out from these two. But then in the elite cavalry tier, you have the Dor en Ernil Lancers, who arguably are kind of more maybe a tier below with the footmen, and then the White Knights are in the middle there. So you've got the Dor en Ernil Lancers, who are a mounted counterpart to, of course, the Dor en Ernil footmen. And these two both come from homeland regions, as it says, and there's their stats just there. They're average cavalry. They are average cavalry. Nothing really to scream about. But your first elite cavalry, and again restricted by homelands, are the White Knights. The White Knights are a cavalry unit that specialise in prolonged melee, whereas most cavalry are hit and run. White Knights are not. They have a low charge and they have no secondary weapon. So do bear that in mind. All of your cavalry are good at charging, but the White Knights are pretty average at it, really. And they're designed really to charge the enemy and then stay there. Whereas everyone else, you should be hitting and running. That's the tactics. But there's the stats for the White Knights, and that's a little bit of an overview for them. And then finally, joining your Uber Talons are the 2 Uber Cavalry of Dol Amroth. The Knights of the Silver Swan, arguably their most famous unit, and my personal favourite looking unit in the entire game. And the Tirith IR Knights, the third of the 3 Tirith IR units. These ones come, of course, from Dol Amroth itself. Swan Knights, shortened to Swan Knights, Knights of the Silver Swan, whatever you want to call them, they come from the 4 key homeland provinces, as I say. And there's the stats of the Knights of the Silver Swan. Very, very good. And again, locked morale. Locked morale, if you do see it, is normally an indicator that that unit is outstanding. It's one of the best you're going to face, and it's going to really challenge you. And there's the stats of the Tirith IR. Ever so slightly behind the Knights of the Silver Swan, but still very, very good. Differences between the two are, of course, the charge bonus and just general overall betterness. They're basically identical units, except one is slightly better than the other one. But because they're both so rare, they just add to that emphasis that Dol Amroth is a very late-game, heavy cavalry nation. but they don't get very much to play with. And then finally, to round it out, the Royal Swan Guard, the cavalry bodyguard of Dol Amroth. And you are seeing, as you might imagine, they have 13 men. Traits and ancillaries can increase the bodyguard retinue size, but this is all you get. However, in an interesting twist, and one of the few bodyguards that actually can, this unit is upgradable. Their armor is upgradable. And they are one of the only bodyguard units that actually has that feature and has a visual upgrade. And when they do upgrade, they lose the Hussar wings. And they also get a few other little visual changes here and there. So that's something that's different from the last game. Their stats are, as you might imagine, very good. They're on par with Knights of the Silver Swan, but there's just so few of them that you can't really use them to decimate the enemy any longer. Right, and that concludes the battle map side, so we'll just charge our entire army in just to get a feel for what they might look like. Now, the only other thing I should mention about the White Knights, is that after the Wind Riders have canned and one possible unit of Rohan, perhaps the Royal Guard, they're one of the fastest cavalry units in the game and therefore one of the fastest units in the game. For some reason they've stalled just before they hit them, which is a real shame because now they're dropping like flies. Oh dear, oh dear. The Doran and Ernal Lancers join in just at the end there, and then these two have decided just to stop short. They've just had a bad day. A large chunk of the enemy is ensuring that their morale doesn't falter. We're up against an army of trollmen of Harad here. To show off just a little bit of battle, just so that the video ends with a little... an interesting end there to say. Hordes of them. Hordes of the buggers, all doing their morale boosting chant. Throwing their javelins at our men. We're getting slaughtered by these half-trolls. But that concludes the Dol Amroth video. So I do hope you've enjoyed it. Again, if you've got any questions, pop them in the comment section below. The old video was linked in the comments, which is the only places that you can now find the videos. As each one of these goes up, I'm replacing the old ones with it. But the link to the old ones will be in these videos. If you do want to go back and watch it, you can.
Our foolish general has thrown his life away.
And it will give you the overview of the
That's our chances
stats,
of
because as I say, the
victory with
stats are very, very similar. They haven't really changed, which is why I've just blitzed through the units. But I hope that gives you an idea of when the units are going to join your army and which ones you might want to work to get. I suppose I could also talk in these bits about how you actually get the units, but almost all of them come from the barracks. The only unit that doesn't are the 3 Tirathayar. They come out of the Tirathayar structure itself, so you don't actually need to build the barracks to get them. So, but then that's... I might factor that in future ones. But until we speak again, dear friends, I do hope you've enjoyed it, and until then, Navar Naden Pedimad Melunin, and farewell.